My body, my choice has become the sentence that ends abortion conversations before they actually start. And someone posted it under my last video. And what struck me wasn't necessarily the sentiment, meaning like bodily autonomy is real and nobody serious is arguing otherwise, but instead how it was used. It isn't necessarily offered as one conversation among several. It's offered as the conversation itself. A closing argument disguised as an opening one. You say something that the person disagrees with, and instead of engaging with what you actually said, they hand you back 4 words that are supposed to settle the debate. And the reason it works as well as it has before is that the sentence sounds like it shouldn't need defending it. So instead, let's try to defend it. Now, here is what my body, my choice has to mean in order to do the work that people are asking it to do when it comes to the abortion debate. It can't just mean that bodily autonomy matters, because nobody on either side of the debate denies that bodily autonomy does matter. The disagreement has never actually been about whether autonomy is real, but instead, it's about what else might be true at the same time. Specifically, what might be true about the thing growing inside of that body, and whether that thing's moral status is heavy enough to limit what autonomy gets to decide. For the slogan to actually end the conversation, it has to claim something much bigger than autonomy matters. It has to claim that autonomy is absolute, that nothing else, no other life, no other body, claim, outweighs it ever in this one specific context. And that is a massive claim to smuggle into 4 little words. And the way that you test a massive claim is to go looking for the places where it should be operating, if it's true, and check whether it actually does. Now, bodily autonomy as a general principle in our lives runs out the moment our bodies are used to harm somebody else's body or even somebody else's property. It is the most basic boundary that our laws and our ethics draw around the concept. You don't get to drive drunk because it's your body behind the wheel, and you don't get to throw a punch because it's your fist. You don't get to walk into somebody's house because it's your legs carrying you there. The moment your body's actions lands on another person or what belongs to them, the my body, my choice stops applying. And it stops applying immediately, without controversy, in every other context that we can think of. But abortion is the one place that this principle suddenly gets treated as if it works differently. As if the same body, taking the same kind of action that ends or damages someone else's existence, gets a pass here that it wouldn't get anywhere else. If abortion, though, is in fact an act that ends another body's life, then the question is not whether bodily autonomy is real. It's why we have decided that this is the one case where harming another body doesn't necessarily count as harming another body. Now, there is a separate version of this point that's worth touching on even briefly. Society doesn't even treat autonomy as absolute, even when there is no other body involved at all. And the draft is one of the clearest examples. The state can force a person's body into war, against their will, on threat of prison, for a collective reason that it judges important enough. Now, I'm not going to lean too heavily into that comparison, because conscription and pregnancy aren't necessarily the same situation, and pretending they are doesn't actually strengthen the argument. The point is even narrower than that, though. Even in cases involving no second body, no competing claim from another living thing, we still don't treat my body as an automatic stopping point, which means the case where it genuinely is another body involved deserves at least as much scrutiny, not less. Now, there is another part of the argument that I do want to spend a little bit of time on, because it's the one that gets dismissed the fastest and shouldn't be. The idea that you didn't choose to get pregnant, so you shouldn't have to bear the consequences. And I understand why this lands as compelling. Nobody plans for a contraceptive failure, and nobody consents to a specific pregnancy the way they consent to a specific decision. But I didn't choose this outcome has never, on its own, been a license to eliminate someone else in order to escape it. Smoking is the clearest version of this. Nobody who smokes is consenting to lung cancer specifically. They're simply accepting a risk, but not signing up for the disease. And plenty of smokers never get cancer at all. But if a smoker does develop cancer, the fact that they didn't choose that outcome does not entitle them to take somebody else's healthy lung to fix the problem. You can fight the cancer, you can treat it and cut it out and do everything that medicine allows you to do to save your own life. But what you cannot do is solve an unchosen consequence by taking something that belongs to somebody else's living body. The unchosen nature of the outcome was never the thing that made that permissible. And it is not the thing that makes it permissible here either. The philosopher who saw this argument coming from a mile away, though, and built the best defense against it that exists, is Judith Jarvis Thomson. Now, Thomson's famous thought experiment asks you to imagine waking up plugged by tubes into a famous unconscious violinist whose survival depends on staying connected to your kidneys for 9 months. You didn't agree to this. The Society of Music Lovers kidnapped you and hooked you up while you were asleep. Nobody disputes that the violinist has a right to life. Thomson's question is whether a right to life automatically comes with a right to use somebody else's body in order to sustain it. And her answer is no, that a right to life is not the same as a right to whatever is needed to keep that life going. And she argues that you would be under no moral obligation to stay hooked up to that violinist for 9 months, even knowing that unplugging him means he dies. This is the argument my whole harming another body point actually has to answer, and Thomson's case is built specifically to slip past it. Her move is to say that unplugging the violinist is not the same act as stabbing him or shooting him, because you're not actually reaching out and attacking his body, you're simply declining to keep your own body in service of his. On her view, there is a real moral difference between killing someone and letting someone die by withdrawing support that you were never obligated to give in the first place. And if that distinction holds, then abortion might not count as harming another body in the same sense that punching someone or driving drunk would. Now, it would be closer to withdrawing of life support than necessarily assisting in the ending of the life. And I think this is the most serious objection on the table, and it deserves a serious answer. So let's actually take it apart with help from the philosophers who have already done most of the work. Let's start with the gap that Thomson herself admits is there. Her entire argument depends on the quiet move from the violinist has a right to life to unplugging him does not violate that right. And she is honest enough to flag the seam in her own essay. A right to life might mean a right not to be killed, or it might be a narrower right, not to be unjustly killed. If it is the second one, then her argument does not actually prove that abortion is permissible. It just relocates the question to whether abortion counts as an unjust killing, which is the very thing she set out to settle and never actually does. Conceding fetal personhood and then quietly substituting right not to be killed unjustly for right not to be killed does not close the gap. But this is where the philosopher Francis Beckwith and a number of others have pushed the hardest. through what is usually called the responsibility or causation objection. Beckwith's point is that the violinist's case is built to erase the one fact that actually decides whether a killing is unjust, how the dependency got there in the first place. You, in her case, are a stranger to the violinist. You did nothing to cause his condition, took no action that put his survival in your hands, and simply woke up one morning to find an obligation that the Society of Music Lovers manufactured for you while you were unconscious. And that is not what pregnancy is, in the overwhelming majority of cases. The dependency of the fetus on the mother's body exists because of an act that she and the father engaged in, an act whose natural and foreseeable consequences can result in the creation of another life. The philosopher and bioethicist Christopher Caxor makes essentially the same move when he argues that parents who voluntarily engage in an act that carries a real chance of creating a human life take on an obligation toward that life that a kidnapped stranger never agreed to and never caused. And you don't get to borrow the moral weight of, I am a random kidnapped stranger with no causal connection to this person's need, and apply it to this situation. A surgeon who opens a patient's chest and then walks away mid-operation is not merely declining to help. He created the condition that makes his continued involvement necessary, and that changes what he is permitted to do next. Pregnancy, in the ordinary case, works the same way, and the violinist's analogy only feels like a clean parallel if you ignore the one detail that actually determines the moral verdict. There is a second line of attack, and it comes at the analogy from a different direction entirely. Critics writing in response to Thompson have pointed out that the violinist scenario requires you to use an organ in a wildly extraordinary way, donating the function of your kidneys to a complete stranger for a purpose that your body was never built for. But pregnancy is not that. The uterus exists, biologically, for exactly the function it's performing during pregnancy. Sustaining a developing human life is not a strange and burdensome imposition on an organ meant for something else. It's simply the ordinary exercise of what that organ is for. And this is sometimes called the ordinary function objection. And it matters because so much of the violinist's emotional force comes from the sense of violation, that your body is being hijacked for a use that it was never meant to serve. But if gestation is, in the most relevant biological and moral sense, what pregnancy's organs are designed to do, then the outrage that the thought experiment is designed to produce does not actually transfer to the case that it is supposed to be illuminating. You are not being asked to donate a kidney to a stranger. You're being asked not to actively end a process that your own body has already started engaging in. Layer those two objections together, and the violinist stops functioning as the clean parallel that Thompson needs it to be. It borrows the moral status of a stranger with no causal connection and no biological involvement, and then transfers that status onto a relationship that is neither of those things. Once the dependency is the one that you caused, and the function being performed is the ordinary function of the organ involved, then the I never agreed to this carries a great deal less weight than it does for someone who woke up already wired to a man that they have never met. And there is a third problem underneath the first two, and it is one I think actually decides this. Unplugging a tube is a withdrawal. A surgical or medical abortion is not a withdrawal. It is a direct, intentional act that ends a life that would otherwise have continued on its own. inside a body that exists for exactly the purpose of sustaining it. That is a direct intervention. And once you see that abortion sits on the killing side of that line rather than the letting it die side, then Thompson's entire argument stops applying to it. Because her argument was never actually a defense of killing, but rather it was a defense of refusing to rescue. And so the violinist's argument does not hold. The thought experiment built to fill that gap smuggles in a stranger with no causal responsibility, asks an organ to perform a function it was never built to do, and then treats that act as if it were a passive one. And all three of those moves fall apart the moment you put them next to what pregnancy and abortion actually are. When you strip them away, what is left is the conclusion that the violinist was built to help you avoid. That ending a pregnancy is an active killing of a being whose dependency exists because of your own prior act, performed by an organ doing exactly what it exists to do, which means it has to clear the same bar that any other intentional killing has to clear. And the whole "I don't want this responsibility" has never been enough to clear that bar anywhere else in human life. And it isn't here either. My body, my choice was never wrong about the body, but it was wrong about the choice. So, with that said, thank you guys for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all next time.